Hey everyone, I'm Ben Dudai from The Spotlight Kid, and today I'm going to be shining the spotlight on a progressive death metal band from England called Luna's Call and their masterful album called Void. So, Luna's Call hails from the East Midlands in England, and even though they haven't been around for a long time, they've already grown a very mature and sophisticated sound and approach to composition. That being said, it never feels stodgy or unadventurous. Quite the contrary. The songs are fresh and fun, yet also epic in feel and scope and extremely engaging. Every song here takes you on a journey with many twists and turns, moving from the onslaught of tech death into, classic prog rock, 70s grandeur, then into, sort of Opeth-esque moodiness, and all the while showing a proficiency for their instruments and songwriting craft, which is really top tier. Anyway, let's dive into the album. We start off the album with track one, Merced's Footsteps. So the album kicks off with a harmonized vocals and a techie prog riff, leading into a stop-start sort of verse with strings and flutes. Maybe it's a mellotron kind of thing going on there. But the vocal harmony is beautiful throughout, and the melody is very catchy. We get a brief moment of tasty death metal with growls in the last 30 seconds of this just over 2-minute song. And then they finish again with those clean harmonies. Short and sweet, nice way to start the album. Then we get to track two, Signs. So here's where the band gets down to business, really. They launch into some fierce prog tech death riffing, and the growls come charging in. They create a fantastic and engaging tension that builds. The drumming is fantastic through all of this as well. The music swells, and the guitars and bass race up and down through more fast prog metal passages, but with the sort of tech ferocity to it. The piano and strings just add another dimension and depth to the music, and everything works so well. The solo comes in and is melodic and ripping and feels very much part of the composition. It doesn't stick out like sometimes, solos can sort of feel like it's a separate entity from the song. And here it feels like it's meant to be there. There's definitely an Opeth vibe, but it's much more techy than Opeth ever is. And there's also more movement. They eventually come to a more sort of stripped down classic prog rock section and settle into this very engaging lead guitar line, which is super cool. That again builds into a new direction of chanted vocals over more spacey mellow prog, eventually kicking into an anthemic passage, which is very uplifting and continues to build up in intensity, eventually ending up back in the death metal growls, but with the instruments remaining uplifting and grandiose. It ends sort of techy, but with the Fender Rhodes ringing out at the end, sort of classic kind of prog way, I guess. Then we get on to track three, Solar Emulation. Again, opens with the ferocious tech death riffing and growls, with some twists and turns thrown in, and eventually building up again with strings or synths. The verse continues heavy and leads again to their beautiful vocal harmonies. All the while, the technicality and progression never lets up, and the song continues to percolate inexorably forward. They move back and forth through these feels and into the perfectly placed and played solo that just kicks ass. Great solo. I love the wah on the guitar here. It's really cool. Then we get a kind of blackened death passage that settles eventually into a more doomy vibe, but without losing the prog or movement, that we always have here in this whole album, actually. So then they dissolve momentarily down to almost nothing, but then burst back in riffing and with growling and riffing hard. The guitars are always on the move, from uplifting melody to rhythmic expression. It all eventually releases into an expansive sounding, clean vocal harmony that sort of relieves the tension and strings float us into another spacey 70s style prog section with more beautiful guitar and bass movements. Eventually that wah guitar comes back to sort of herald us into the next movement, which is an almost symphonic metal vibe for a while, but then sits into a tasty prog riff laced with keyboards. It gets a little bit quirky for a brief moment. The metal returns, then there's more quirk, and then it moves into the sort of wonderful circular epic section of uplifting harmonized vocals, solo, and then that circular proggy riff again, sort of thing, variation. So tasty, it's super cool. I really love that at the end they're doing this malfunction thing. It's just it just sounds so bloody cool. Great song. Anyway, we finish with that one and move on to track 4, and Enceladus and the Life Inside. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Enceladus and the Life Inside. Anyway, I think that's right. So here we get an acoustic guitar with either like a phaser or flanger affected bass, sort of gliding through it, the line sort of gliding through it, and then they repeat that line on the xylophone or something like that anyway. It slows, it settles into a very haunting and beautifully performed vocal here in the verse. The song slowly builds up again, and it's pure prog rock gold. Almost Yes-like bass and those spacey keyboard lines. Very cool. So then, it comes back to those impassioned verses. But again, it's evolved and grown and moved forward into another prog passage to eventually reach a haunting string orchestral movement to sort of end this really beautiful song. Then we get to track 5, Locus. So we have more soaring chant-like harmony to start the song. Again, a bit of the Opeth vibe, but not in a copycat way. With these guys, it feels more like kind of like a logical, creative evolution of that Opeth sound rather than a rehash of it in any way. Again, we get that 70s, that classic 70s prog bass line and vibe, but with a modern twist of intensity to it for the verse, and with another catchy, fantastically delivered vocal. The drumming is always so engaging on this album too, really. I have to say I love when metal drummers have more of a fusion feel to their playing. It really gives everything so much more scope and dynamic range. It just adds so much. Anyway, we get to a very Opeth-like riff and growls, and the heaviness continues building and into a cool wah lead passage. The prog never lets up, and again we move through multiple sections of heavy twists and turns and growls and back to those beginning harmonies. It pauses briefly, then launches into another short but really uplifting outro. Another fantastic track. This leads us on to track 6, In Bile They Bathe. What a great death metal title. This one launches head first into some death metal with more straight, direct riffing than on the previous tracks. There's a few twists and turns, then it goes full on tech death momentarily, and then hey, let's drop some symphonic metal with wah on the bass just for good measure. Then we get back to the straight death again. It's all done very well, and the riffs and drumming are very tasty. We get a great solo toward the end, and finish with the death metal rounding out with a kind of nice melodic passage on top. So that's very cool. We get to track 7, Silverfish. So here again we have a short and sweet 2-minute interlude kind of thing. No, it's just a nice, clean, gentle guitar with some brooding sounds floating in the background. Just sort of short and sweet little interlude. Which leads us into the last song on the album, Fly Further Cosmonaut. So we have like a sort of dissonant warning-like riff leads into sort of this heavy death metal verse. There's still plenty of movement and percolation bubbling through the metal though. These guys never let things stay in one place, and I love that about them. They also never lose the feel of the song, and you know, that's a real credit to their songwriting abilities. Anyway, the song expands again with heaviness, but then settles into an acoustic passage with a beautiful vocal part. We get a nice, gentle guitar solo. The vocals come back with the strings or keys sort of swelling, and with the vocal ahs, I don't know what else to call them, choral things, I guess. We just call them vocal ahs. Continuing, the band kicks into the prog metal, and the journey sort of moves on from there. You know, more prog death is just around the corner, but it moves on again. More cleans and a new feel. Heavy drumming and chants come next. Then this sort of descending clean guitar and sort of like orchestral movie soundtrack like passage, and then sort of back to some heavy slow riffing with tense droning and sound effects on top. It sort of growls along like this, with of course, you know, all the twists and turns we've come to expect from this album by now. There's more prog rock, and this time with other instrumentation, more growling, and you know, the riffs constantly evolving. We eventually have the choral ahs again, and sort of like swirling keyboards sounding really expansive and sort of epic, until eventually they come and bludgeon us, you know, one last time to finish the album as a prog, but most assuredly death metal band. Anyway, so that brings us to the end of the magnificent album Void. So how would I rate this album? Well, I love almost everything about this album. In Bile They Bathe is probably my least favourite, and compared to the other songs feels perhaps a touch undercooked. But that's not to say that I dislike it at all. Actually, compared to, you know, most modern metal, it still ranks pretty high for me, and I'm definitely not skipping it or anything like that. But because I have that feeling about it, I can't say it's a perfect album for me. However, it's an almost perfect album. The songs are expansive, exciting, and memorable. You know, the production is great too. You know, a lot of modern metal sounds way too much like computer plugins to me these days. But here it sounds more organic, and the instruments all have their place in the mix, and it sounds very natural. The performances are all first class. You know, the guitars are exciting and intense. The bass is dynamic and interesting. The drums are, you know, They're really perfect and precise and inventive. And the vocals are both, hauntingly beautiful and epic, as well as intense and brutal, the heavy parts. So, with all that being said, and it being an almost perfect album, I'm giving this one a 9.5 out of 10. I highly recommend this album and band. I can't recommend them enough. Their previous album, Divinity, is also great. So go check it out. Fantastic band that needs your support. So go listen to their music, go buy their albums and buy their merch, and do it ASAP. Okay, so that's it for today. Thanks again for joining me and helping me to shine the spotlight on another killer band. So from me, the Spotlight Kid, keep it metal, and see you next time.